Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about levels and frameworks. Let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, would you be able to provide a somewhat detailed framework of what you consider to be senior, just to use as a plan? So this was posted on a video I made called How Long Does It Take for a Junior to Become a Senior? And the basics of like the gist of the whole video is I try to explain that it's very contextual what it means to be senior, because in one company they might think you're a senior and in another they don't think you're a senior, and it's a bit of a range there. So what I basically can give you is just the way that I usually evaluate the level that you have. In other words, like goes because basically my framework for how to evaluate if you are at the level that I would deem appropriate for whatever role that you have, and that is from junior. My range is usually junior, mid-level, senior, and then tech lead. The reason why I keep it at that, like those terms and that level, has mostly to do with that is the number of roles that you are in an like the core at the very least. It's going to be the most core part of any software development team. You can skip the tech lead, but in practice you will always have a tech lead of some sort if you go with my setups. It's just a question of if that tech lead is the scene is that just another senior or something like that. Now I want you to be really, really careful with what I'm saying right now, guys, because as I said, even in that video, I mentioned that the biases and personal values and things like that, they all play in every single company. So if I give you my definitions, I want to believe, and I have on fairly good authority, that my definitions are pretty much on the money for most of what the average software company is more or less going to look for. It's not going to be perfect by any means. The core of it, like you take, if the things I'm going to tell you now, take away what makes sense. You can double check or triple check whatever I'm saying with your coworkers or your managers or your bosses or whatever, because everybody has a slightly different opinion on exact, like every single little detail, but I hope I can catch the broad stroke stuff. So what I argue is that for you to be able to be a role of something, you have to be able to fulfill certain criteria within the roles that other people have. So, for example, you're not going to be, in my world, you can't be a senior without having at least the foundations in place. And so some seniors, they have this idea that, I'm a senior because I've worked for 5 years. And in my video, I explain exactly that I don't care how long you have worked. That is irrelevant. What matters is, can you fulfill the necessary requirements that are put on you in a given work context? And so without any knowledge of where you work or what's going to be true for you and so forth, I'll give you what I usually do. So junior level as the entry staff level, and what usually I ask a few evaluation questions when I have like personal growth conversations with software developers. It's the same thing I give to the managers, and they use my framework for basic evaluation of things that people could improve on, or like if they're going to go and get a promotion, or if we're going to hire somebody. It's the same framework, because the general idea behind it, I hope, will make sense to you. So for a junior, usually one of the first questions I ask is, can you ship code to production with a little bit of assistance? Basically, do you know how to write software, and if you and with help, can you efficiently do that? Can you debug the system if it fails in production or something like that? Do you know enough to actually check if, like, the code that you just shipped, if it broke? Do you know how to, like, sort of figure out what happened and how to, do these basic things like roll back and check logs and stuff like that? Because it's going to be necessary for you. And then, of course, do you know your team rituals? And are you confident in that the tests that you write when you write tests? Do you know how to do that so that they actually prevent bugs? This is the bare minimum, I would argue, is necessary for a junior to be possible to, like, have in a team or something like that. Now, for a mid-level, for example, I would raise it and say, okay, so now you're going to it's basically the same thing before, because everything is, like as I said, a senior cannot be a senior without past like a junior level, in my opinion. So for a mid-level, we raise the bar a little bit more and say, okay, can you ship without any assistance? Like, basically, are you autonomous? Can you do all the things that the juniors are doing, but without having a lot of help? And then, of course, can you set up a new project from scratch? Do you really know your stack? And so, you're not like sort of locked down into one setup that was given to you, usually from someone who's already came before you. Can you create your own setup for like a new product or something like that? And then, of course, now if social matters, things become even more important. Do you have a good relationship with your coworkers? And then, of course, if you have junior coworkers, are they happy to get help from you? Are you a team player? Are you the sort of person who's going to help out your coworkers and they trust you and things like that? These things are usually the things that I would say are common for a mid-level, because now you're autonomous and you fit into the team and you can ship and things like that. This is the level where this is the sweet spot. Are you guys? This is where the vast majority of software developers will stay for the rest of their career, and the very few will go above this level, even though they will use the term senior. And that's the thing I'm telling you. This, to me, is not the senior level. This is the bare minimum you would have to cover in order to be a profitable software developer, because a junior is usually an investment, whereas a mid-level is just an individual who will produce the code and nothing more, basically. Now, when you get to a senior level, if you're going to go with my definition, this usual thing I usually do now is that I add another layer, which is, okay, so are you going to be able to help your team members, mid-levels, juniors, doesn't matter, or other seniors, doesn't matter who it is? Can you help them fix the majority of their problems if they need help? Are you the sort of person who can reliably fix issues that come up, regardless of what they are? And do you have a good working relationship with your stakeholders? In other words, the people who are depending on your team and all the stuff. Do you know, like, the sort of system that you're building? Do you know enough about the system, know the domain and the people around you to actually feel confident in that, when people are asking questions, should I go with implementation A or implementation B? Do you know which answer to give? And that should be based on your understanding of the system. This is the business mindset I've been telling you guys about in other videos. This is based on your understanding of the people that you are catering to, the people you are building the system for. If you don't have a relationship with them, I don't consider you a senior, because you have no way of knowing if you're building the right system if you don't actually have a clue about what what the general direction of the product is. And then, of course, are the other team members happy to get help from you? And can you facilitate all the team meetings? Can I drop you into a team with like a few people, and then you can make sure that the Kanban board is like that they all know how the stories are working and stuff. I'm not saying you have to be a techie, you don't have to own that, but you should at very least know what type of sync ups and rituals in like the team activities that you perform within a team, and you should be able to facilitate them, because as a senior software developer you are very much the most intended to be the most experienced person on hand. And if you're going to be that sort of individual, you should have been in the game for long enough so that maybe you don't sit in on a bunch of meetings and do all this sort of stuff. But I mean, it shouldn't be much of a stretch for a real senior to be able to facilitate a stand-up or a retro or whatever it might have, right? It's something that you most likely have done 100 times, and you understand the need and value of these things, not just for yourself, but for the other people, for the juniors. And that's sort of the thing that I see in a lot of some people, at the very least, who are quote unquote seniors, but like they don't do any of these activities, and they don't take responsibility for the productivity of their team and their team members. They just don't give a fuck, really, or don't see it as their obligation or it was something that they should be doing. And then if we go all the way up to tech lead, so this is, in my opinion, the highest level that you can reach within a team if you're just going to work with that one team. And tech lead doesn't necessarily have to be that you mean that you are the most senior person. I usually just say that it is the ideal state. If you think about it, it's a linear progression. And then basically it should be, do you have the most domain knowledge of anybody of your team, like among the most domain knowledgeable people in your team? In other words, do you understand the entire that most of the system? Do you know why you're building it, why it's being built, how the various features work roughly, and things like that? And then of course, are you the main go-to person for the stakeholders? That's my other videos where I've made, where I say that the only question a really good, like a team lead has to be able to, or a tech lead has to be able to answer at all times, is when is it done, or ways, similar things like that, or like why doesn't this work, or how does it work, or so forth. You basically have to have an answer to that question at all times. And in order for you to do that, you really have to know the system, and you have to know your people, and you need to know roughly how things are, like in the state of the code base and things like. You have to have a holistic understanding of your setup. And then of course, do you know the strengths and weaknesses of your team members? Do you know who's going to do well and who's not going to do so well, or what tasks like are appropriate for some people, and so forth? And that gives us growth plans. Do you have an idea of what types of things you should put on various people so that they grow, so that you get a well-rounded team? Because if you don't think about that, you're going to have one or two people who might be very, very productive, and basically if they quit, your whole team collapses, unless you are there, of course, because that brings us to the next thing. Are you the main driver behind improving delivery speed and quality and stuff like that? Because usually, depending on the team, some teams are lucky that they have like very driven developers and stuff like that who might want to improve things and so forth and so forth. But in many cases, it's a top-down thing, where I've seen it so many times, guys. You have teams where have no testing or anything like that, and the team lead couldn't give, like a tech lead couldn't give a fuck. Like the tech lead is not writing tests or doing anything of it, so why would the software developers do it? So if you're a poor leader, it's going to cascade downwards. And then the last one is, can you act as the last line of competency between you and your team members when they need help? Or basically, can you help your team members basically with anything? And this is this is to me the ideal tech lead. If you really just want to bend my arm about this, I can say that being a tech lead is not as serious as it sounds, because in many cases it's just facilitation, meetings, prepping and stuff like that. But the reason why I want to define it as this is because the idea behind my little framework is that the higher up the ladder you go, the more impact you are expected to have on the overall work. And so if you're going to be the tech lead, you should ideally be the individual who is most in tune with how things should be working, and the person who is really there for the team, and a little bit like a big brother or something like, or a coach or something like that, with very hands-on skills on everything that's going on, because that is the ideal state for the company and for the team, to have such an individual who's taking holistic ownership of the entire system. Then it doesn't mean that you write all the code yourself. You have your seniors and your juniors and stuff like that, but you are, as I said, basically the coach or something similar to the team. You're the individual who has been doing this for long enough and been in tune, like sort of taking the time to really understand the system, so that when others don't really know exactly how something works, you're the person they can go to for help. So what I want you to take away from this is that my little framework, as I mentioned, it's really just a loose set of questions that I usually ask and try to evaluate with people and so forth. And I do it either for myself when I evaluate a person, or if like they want my feedback, or if a manager asks me and stuff like that. And the reason why I do it this way is because the basic idea that I have behind seniority and tech lead and mid-level and so forth has very little to do with how long have you been doing something. It has to do with, are you capable of fulfilling the needs of an average software team? Based on my experiences working with a lot of teams by now, both as a junior, mid-level, senior, tech lead, and then I've been more and more in like other things and so forth. I've seen many combinations, and it always comes back to the same basic requirements as I was saying. As a junior, most focus is be able to ship something, create value, write tests, like the basics of the basics. Without that, you can't even be a software developer, right? Mid-level is do basically what the juniors are doing, but they should be able to ask you for help, and you should ideally be able to work fairly autonomously. This is the normal, like standard level. Senior means basically that you can shoulder the responsibilities of ownership and making sure that the team is working and following good practices and stuff like that, because you're one of the most experienced people on the team, ideally. An individual who's been around a little bit, seen a few things, know how to set things up and do them right and so forth, so that everybody feels productive. The worst seniors I know are the people who they create a setup where the juniors can't even work, and that's not a real senior. That's an well, it's I don't, maybe you can call it this, and I don't know. I don't agree with that. That is not a mature mindset, and that's the maturity is what I'm looking for. And then tech lead is basically senior plus plus. It's the individual who has the absolute most domain knowledge, makes sure takes holistic ownership, has like a plan for how the team should operate and quality improvements and things like that. It's very tricky to say where the line between senior and tech lead goes, but if you're going to bend my arm, as I said, tech lead basically means that you have to have the senior's mentality, the mature way of thinking, plus a great deal of understanding of your business and stakeholders and what they need and so forth and so forth. These are the general things that I go for. Have a great day.